Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's us, John and Karen, still figuring out this wild ride called van life after 50. Now, we often get comments saying how idyllic it all looks, how brave we are. And mostly, it is wonderful. But today, we want to share a story from our early days, a time when, if I'm being brutally honest, I thought Karen was about 5 minutes away from booking a one-way ticket back home and leaving me to talk to the seagulls. I genuinely thought Karen would quit the van after 1 week, then this happened. It's a story about expectations, reality, and finding magic where you least expect it. We were about 3 weeks into our grand European adventure, specifically navigating the gloriously rugged, and at that point, rather damp, coastline of Brittany in France. Our van, Serendipity Sally, as we'd christened her, was proving to be a trusty, if occasionally temperamental, companion. I was in my element, every sunrise a masterpiece, every winding road a new promise. Karen was being a trooper, a very quiet, slightly pale trooper. The kind of trooper who looks at a composting toilet with the same expression one might reserve for a particularly venomous snake. "It's cozy, isn't it?" she'd said that morning, her voice carefully neutral as she tried to make coffee while simultaneously avoiding bumping her elbow on the overhead locker for the third time. The rain was drumming a relentless rhythm on Sally's roof, a soundtrack that was beginning to feel less like a gentle lullaby and more like a persistent interrogation. I knew that cozy was Karen speak for "I can't swing a cat in here," and frankly, I'm starting to miss the cat. My heart did a little nervous flutter. The unspoken truth hung in the air, thick as the condensation on the windows. This wasn't quite the dream she'd envisioned when we sold the house. I had this idea, see. There was this coastal path, the GR34, fabled for its dramatic cliffs and hidden coves. I'd read about a particular stretch, not too strenuous, that promised breathtaking views. Today, I announced with a forced cheerfulness that probably sounded as convincing as a politician's promise, we conquer the Sentier de Douaniers. Fresh air, stunning vistas, it'll blow the cobwebs away. Karen looked at the rain, then at me, then back at the rain. Cobwebs, or us, she muttered, but she started lacing up her hiking boots. That was Karen for you, even when she was convinced disaster loomed, she'd still show up. I just hoped this particular disaster wouldn't be the end of our van life dream before it had even properly begun. The plan was simple, a good hike, a picnic with a view, and hopefully, a renewed sense of wonder for Karen. The reality, as it often does, had other plans. The drive to the trailhead was, shall we say, character building. Sally, bless her wide berth, isn't exactly designed for ancient Breton farm tracks that appear to have been paved sometime during the Neolithic period, possibly by a drunk druid. "Are you sure this is the right way, John?" Karen asked, her voice tight, as we scraped past a gnarled hawthorn bush that left a faint screech down Sally's pristine white flank. I consulted the map, which was rapidly becoming a damp, indecipherable pulp in my hands. Absolutely. Adventure, darling. Just around this, oh, dear, around the bend was not the charming car park promised by my guidebook, but a very large, very muddy puddle masquerading as a small lake, effectively blocking our path. The rain, which had briefly paused as if to lull us into a false sense of security, chose that moment to return with a vengeance. "Well," Karen said, her tone flat. "This is certainly an experience." I could see the "I told you so" forming in her eyes, though she was too kind to voice it directly. The silence in the van was heavy, broken only by the drumming rain and the faint, mournful squeak of a windscreen wiper that was clearly contemplating retirement. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just about a spoiled hike, this felt like a referendum on our entire lifestyle change. Every mishap, every discomfort, was another piece of evidence for the prosecution, and I was starting to feel like a very inadequate defense attorney. We sat there for a few minutes, the engine ticking as it cooled. "Okay," I said, trying to inject some optimism into my voice. "Plan B. There's a little fishing village a few kilometers back. We saw a sign for a creperie. How about we retreat, regroup, and consume our body weight in butter and sugar? It was a weak offering, and I knew it. Karen just sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the unwashed camping dishes and lumpy van beds in the world. But then, as I was about to put Sally into reverse, she pointed. "What's that track there?" she asked, indicating a barely visible path leading off to the right, disappearing into the gorse and heather. It wasn't marked on my map. It looked overgrown, uninviting, and probably led to another, even bigger puddle. "Probably nothing, love," I said. "Just an old farmer's track." She was quiet for a moment, staring at the almost hidden opening in the undergrowth. "Let's just see where it goes," she said, surprisingly. "Just a little way." "We're already here, and we're already wet," I was taken aback. This was not the reaction I expected. Usually, faced with such a setback, Karen's inclination would be to head for the nearest source of dry towels and strong tea. Perhaps it was a touch of defiance, a refusal to be entirely beaten by the Breton weather and my questionable navigation skills. Or maybe, just maybe, a tiny spark of the adventure we'd promised ourselves had flickered to life. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. She nodded, a small, determined set to her jaw. "Why not? It can't be worse than sitting here listening to that wiper squeak," and so, with a shared shrug that was part resignation, part reckless abandon, we decided to explore the path less traveled, or in this case, the path barely visible. We pulled Sally as far off the main track as we dared, grabbed our waterproofs, and plunged into the dripping greenery. The path was narrow, muddy, and clearly hadn't seen much foot traffic recently. Brambles snagged at our trousers, and low-hanging branches showered us with cold rainwater every few steps. For the first 10 minutes, I was convinced this was a terrible idea. My boots were squelching, Karen was silent behind me, and I was mentally composing an apology for dragging her on yet another wild goose chase. "Perhaps we should turn back," I suggested, half expecting an eager agreement. But Karen, who had been surprisingly nimble navigating the slippery roots and rocks, just said, "Not yet. I want to see what's around that next bend." There was a new note in her voice, a hint of curiosity that hadn't been there before. It was enough to keep me going. We pushed on, the only sounds our squelching footsteps and the persistent drip from the leaves. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and bracken, a surprisingly invigorating perfume. And then, the path began to climb, gently at first, then more steeply. The gorse thinned a little, replaced by hardy coastal grasses. I could hear a new sound now, a distant, rhythmic roar. The sea. We emerged from the dense undergrowth quite suddenly, onto a small, windswept headland. And the view, oh, the view. It snatched the breath from my lungs. The rain had momentarily eased, and shafts of sunlight were breaking through the bruised purple clouds, illuminating a wild, rugged coastline that stretched for miles in either direction. Giant granite cliffs, sculpted by millennia of wind and waves, plunged dramatically into a churning turquoise sea. White-crested waves crashed against their base, sending plumes of spray high into the air. Sea birds wheeled and cried overhead, riding the updrafts. It was raw, untamed, and utterly magnificent. We hadn't found the gentle, signposted trail from the guidebook, but we had stumbled upon something infinitely more powerful, more elemental. Karen walked slowly to the edge of the cliff, her hood falling back to reveal her face. She just stood there, staring out at the tumultuous ocean, her expression unreadable for a moment. I held my breath, wondering what she was thinking. Was this enough? Could this wild, unexpected beauty compensate for the damp socks and the cramped living quarters? I watched as a small smile began to play on her lips. It wasn't a polite, trying to be brave smile. It was genuine, wide, and filled with a kind of awe I hadn't seen on her face in weeks, maybe months. She turned to me, her eyes shining. "John," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the wind and waves. This is incredible." The wind whipped her hair around her face, and there were raindrops clinging to her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. She looked windswept, a little disheveled, and utterly beautiful. "It really is something, isn't it?" I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. We stood there for a long time, side by side, not speaking, just drinking in the raw power and majesty of the scene. The earlier frustrations, the cramped van, the soggy map, the blocked road, they all just melted away, insignificant against the grandeur of this moment. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, privy to a secret performance by nature at its most dramatic. There were no tourist coaches here, no ice cream vans, no carefully curated viewpoints with safety railings. Just us, the wind, the sea, and the ancient, unyielding land. A pair of gannets soared past, impossibly close, their wings catching the fleeting sunlight. Karen let out a little gasp of delight. "Did you see that?" she exclaimed, grabbing my arm, her earlier reserve completely gone. "They were so close." We watched them dive, spearing into the waves with incredible precision, and then resurface, shaking the water from their feathers. It was a simple thing, a fleeting moment of wildlife encounter, but it felt profound. It was a reminder of the untamed world that existed just beyond the neatly ordered life we had left behind, a world that we were now, tentatively, beginning to explore. The sun broke through properly then, bathing the entire coastline in a golden, ethereal light. It was as if the landscape itself was rewarding us for our perseverance, for choosing the unknown path. Eventually, as the next band of rain began to sweep in from the sea, we reluctantly turned to leave. The walk back through the overgrown track felt different. The brambles seemed less aggressive, the mud less treacherous. There was a lightness in our steps, a shared sense of discovery that warmed us more effectively than any waterproof jacket. When we got back to Sally, she didn't seem quite so small or confining. In fact, she looked rather welcoming, a cozy metal burrow promising shelter and warmth. As I fumbled with the keys, Karen reached out and touched the spot where the hawthorn had scratched Sally's paintwork. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I think it gives her character." I stared at her. Character? This was the woman who once had a minor meltdown because a shopping trolley had left a barely perceptible scuff on her car bumper. We clambered inside, shedding our wet gear. The interior of the van, which had felt so claustrophobic that morning, now seemed almost spacious, a haven from the elements. I put the kettle on for tea, the familiar hiss and rumble a comforting sound. Karen, instead of retreating to her Kindle with a sigh, started humming as she toweled her hair. "That creperie still an option?" she asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Because I think I've earned about 3 of them." With extra chocolate, the change in her was palpable. It wasn't just the relief of being out of the rain, it was something deeper. It was as if that wild, windswept cliff edge had blown away more than just the cobwebs. It had blown away some of her apprehension, her resistance. Later that evening, tucked up in Sally, parked, legally, this time, in a quiet spot overlooking a much calmer sea, the remnants of our crepe feast a happy memory, we talked. Really talked. "You know," Karen began, cupping her mug of tea in her hands, "I was really struggling, John." More than I let on, I nodded, my heart aching a little at her admission, but also relieved that it was finally out in the open. "I know, love. I saw it. And I was worried. I honestly thought you were going to tell me this whole van life thing was a massive mistake and you wanted out." She smiled, a soft, reflective expression. "The thought had crossed my mind," she admitted. "More than once. It's so different. All the things I took for granted, a proper shower, space to move, not having to think about where we're going to get water or empty the loo. It felt like we traded comfort for being damp and slightly lost most of the time," she chuckled, a genuine, warm sound. "I think I was focusing so much on what I'd given up that I wasn't seeing what we could gain." "And today?" I prompted gently. "What changed today?" She looked out of the window at the moonlit water. "Today," she said slowly, "today I understood. When we were standing on that cliff, with the wind and the sea, and that incredible, wild view, it was like nothing I've ever experienced. It wasn't on any tourist map. We found it by accident, by taking a chance. And it was ours. That feeling, it was worth 1,000 hot showers. I reached out and took her hand. It was pretty special, wasn't it? It was more than special, she insisted. It was a revelation. I realized that this life, this van life, isn't about trying to recreate our old life in a smaller space. It's about embracing the unpredictability. It's about being open to getting a bit lost, because sometimes that's when you find the truly amazing things. The things you can't plan for, the things that aren't in any guidebook. She squeezed my hand. I was so worried about the lack of control, the messiness of it all. But maybe the messiness is where the magic happens. I thought about that. The messiness is where the magic happens. It was a profound observation, and it resonated deeply with my own feelings about why we'd embarked on this journey. We hadn't sold our comfortable home and most of our belongings to live a life of perfect, predictable ease. We'd done it for the adventure, for the freedom, for the chance to see the world and ourselves in a new light. We'd done it to feel alive, truly alive, in a way that our old routines, however comfortable, no longer allowed. And Karen, bless her, had just articulated the core of it perfectly. I also realized, she continued, a slight blush rising on her cheeks, that I'm tougher than I thought. I mean, a few weeks ago, the idea of traipsing through a muddy, overgrown path in the rain would have filled me with horror. Today, well, it was still muddy and wet, but it was also an adventure. And I kind of liked it, she grinned. Don't tell anyone I said that, though. I have a reputation to maintain, I laughed, a huge wave of relief and affection washing over me. This was my Karen. The Karen who, beneath her sometimes cautious exterior, had a spirit of adventure that I'd always known was there. It had just needed the right conditions to bloom. We talked for hours that night, about our hopes for the journey ahead, about the kind of experiences we wanted to seek out. No longer was it just my enthusiasm pulling us along. Now, it felt like a shared dream again, reinvigorated by a dose of wild Breton coastline and a willingness to get our boots muddy. Karen even started looking at the maps with a new interest, pointing out other coastal paths, other intriguing-looking blank spots that might hide similar wonders. The fear I'd harbored, that nagging worry that this grand experiment was doomed to fail, finally receded. It was replaced by a quiet confidence, not that everything would always be easy, but that together, we could handle whatever the road threw at us, and find the joy in it. That day became a bit of a touchstone for us. Whenever things got a little tough, a van breakdown in the middle of nowhere, a frustrating bureaucratic tangle, or just a day when the space felt a bit too small, one of us would say, "Remember Brittany?" And we'd smile, recalling that wind-swept cliff, the crashing waves, and the unexpected magic of a wrong turn. It was a reminder that the best moments often lie just off the beaten path, waiting to be discovered by those willing to take a chance. It taught us that true freedom isn't about avoiding challenges, but about embracing them as part of the adventure, knowing that sometimes, the greatest rewards come from the most unexpected detours. So, to anyone out there who's maybe a bit like Karen was in those early days, feeling hesitant or overwhelmed by the idea of a big life change, whether it's van life or something else entirely, I hope our story offers a little encouragement. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to have doubts. But don't let those doubts stop you from taking that first step, or from trying that overgrown, unmarked path. Because you just never know what breathtaking views, or what surprising inner strengths, you might discover. The initial discomfort, the learning curve, it's all part of it. But pushing through that, staying open, that's where the real transformation happens. Karen didn't quit after that first week, or the second, or the third. Instead, she found her footing, quite literally, on a muddy cliff path in France, and in doing so, she rediscovered a part of herself, and we rediscovered the joy of shared adventure. The next morning, we woke to sunshine. Actual, bona fide sunshine, sparkling on the calm sea. Karen was already up, making coffee, and she was humming again. "Morning," Skipper," she said brightly as I emerged from my sleepy cocoon. "I was thinking, that guidebook mentioned a local market in Paintball today. Fancy a bit of exploring?" The van felt different. The world felt different. Or maybe, we were different. More resilient, more open, more us. The shadow of her potential departure had lifted, replaced by the bright promise of shared horizons. We spent the morning at the market, a vibrant, bustling affair filled with the sights, sounds, and smells of Brittany. Fresh oysters, pungent cheeses, colorful vegetables, and local artisans selling their wares. Karen, who usually found crowds a bit much, was in her element, chatting animatedly in her halting but enthusiastic French, haggling good-naturedly for a beautiful hand-painted ceramic bowl. She even bought a beret, which she wore at a jaunty angle, looking every inch the seasoned traveler. I just watched her, a goofy grin plastered on my face. This was the Karen I knew and loved, adventurous, curious, and full of life. The van, Sally, felt like our trusty steed, ready to carry us onwards. As we drove away from Paintball later that day, with fresh bread, cheese, and a bottle of local cider stowed safely away, Karen turned to me. "You know," she said, "I think I'm actually going to miss this specific kind of chaos when we eventually, if ever, stop." I raised an eyebrow. "Missing chaos, are we now?" "That's a new one," she laughed. "Well, maybe not the chaos itself, but the feeling of overcoming it. The feeling of, well, like yesterday. That feeling is addictive, and that, right there, was the moment I knew for certain that not only would Karen not quit the van, but she was truly, deeply, in this for the long haul. The open road had worked its magic, not by being easy, but by being real, and by showing us that the best stories often begin where the map ends. So, what's next for us? Well, tomorrow we're planning to head further south along the coast. There's a rumor of a hidden beach that's only accessible at low tide, and a tiny island you can walk to. Sounds like just our kind of slightly complicated, potentially messy, but hopefully magical adventure. We'll be sure to pack our rain gear, just in case, but also our newfound appreciation for the detours. Every day out here is a lesson, a gift. Some days the lessons are harder than others, some days the gifts are wrapped in unexpected packaging, like a rainy, muddy, dead-end road. But they are always there, if you're willing to look. And that really sums up what this journey is about for us, especially at this stage in our lives. It's about not letting the fear of the unknown, or the discomfort of change, rob us of the chance to experience something truly extraordinary. It's about choosing to live fully, to embrace the imperfections, and to find the beauty not just in the grand vistas, but in the small victories and the shared moments of discovery. It's about proving to ourselves, one muddy trail and one wrong turn at a time, that adventure doesn't have an age limit. Thanks for joining us for this little trip down memory lane. It's funny how a day that started with so much doubt and frustration can become one of your most cherished memories, a real turning point. We hope it gives you a bit of insight into the real ups and downs of this lifestyle, and maybe a little inspiration to chase your own adventures, whatever they may be. Remember, sometimes the path you don't plan is the one that leads you exactly where you need to be. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and keep living fully, 1 mile, and 1 story, at a time.